From the infamous feuds to the most outspoken one, Bette Davis has a fair share in Hollywood dramatic battles, and this first one, it is a real shocker. 1. Katharine Hepburn. Katharine Hepburn and Bette Davis were known to the world as good friends. However, in the competitive world of Hollywood, tensions ran high and egos clashed between these leading ladies. In the early 1940s, both Bette Davis and Katharine Hepburn were rising stars in the industry. Bette, with her hunger for Oscars, had already won 2 Academy Awards for Best Actress, while Katharine was establishing herself as a formidable talent. But it was in 1938, when Katharine won her first Oscar for her performance in Morning Glory, that the rivalry between the two actresses intensified. Bette, who was nominated for her role in Jezebel that year, felt overshadowed by Katharine's win and couldn't hide her disappointment. As the years went by, the competition between Bette and Katharine only grew stronger. In 1940, Bette was nominated for Dark Victory and Katharine for The Philadelphia Story. Once again, Katharine took home the Oscar, leaving Bette empty-handed. Bette's hunger for Oscars was no secret, but it was Katharine who ended up stealing the spotlight with 4 wins in the lead actress category, while Bette managed to snag only 2. With such intense competition, it's no wonder that these powerhouse actresses couldn't see eye to eye. Rumor has it that Bette despises being a woman in a man's world and seeks revenge by trying to castrate her competition. As Humphrey Bogart famously said, "She's an egotistical little bitch," and even Bette herself admitted to having a bit of a nasty streak. 2. Fay Dunway. But Katharine wasn't the only one. Fay Dunway also fell victim to Bette's fiery personality. You know Fay Dunway, the actress who famously played Joan Crawford in the movie Mommy Dearest. Well, she had her own first-hand experience of the Hollywood rivalry with Bette Davis when they worked together on the TV movie The Disappearance of Amy in 1976. Now, their feud may not have reached the epic proportions of the Davis-Crawford saga that we'll be sharing soon, but let me tell you, there was no love lost between Bette and Fay. Davis never held back her true feelings and publicly expressed her distaste for Dunaway. She even called her out on The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson. Can you believe it? When Carson asked Davis to name one of the worst people in Hollywood, she didn't hesitate for a second. Fay Dunaway, she declared, and let me tell you, everyone else would say the same thing. But why did Davis have such a bone to pick with Dunaway? Well, according to Bette, Fay was just uncooperative and only cared about herself. Talk about a Hollywood diva, right? And get this, while they were waiting for Dunaway on the set of The Disappearance of Amy, Davis would pass the time by singing "I've Written a Letter to Daddy," a song from Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, the only movie she did with Joan Crawford. Well, that might not be a coincidence. Knowing Davis and her sharp wit, it could very well have been a subtly scathing commentary on the similarities she saw between Dunaway and Crawford. As for Dunaway, she chose to maintain a dignified silence during Davis's lifetime, only breaking it to share her side of the story in her 1995 autobiography, Looking for Gatsby. Apparently, she regretted her silence during the feud and wished she had stood up for herself. But knowing Davis's reputation for being relentless when it comes to feuds, it's probably for the best that Dunaway kept quiet. 3. Miriam Hopkins. Before diving into Bette Davis's famous feud with Crawford, let's explore another fiery rival, this time with Miriam Hopkins. These brilliant actresses clashed from their first meeting in New York's theater scene. Davis and Hopkins were fiercely competitive women destined to clash in an industry where only one could reign supreme. Their mutual disdain began in summer stock theater and intensified as they both rose to stardom. Despite being a bigger star in theater, Hopkins was overshadowed by Davis in Hollywood. Things worsened when Jezebel, a play for which Hopkins sold the rights, became a hit movie starring Davis. Davis even won an Oscar for her role, leaving Hopkins envious and resentful. Their rivalry continued when they were cast as cousins in love with the same man in The Old Maid. On set, their animosity leaked into the newspapers, with reports of Hopkins deliberately provoking Davis. The tension between the two was palpable, and it didn't go unnoticed by their co-stars. Their feud reached new heights when Davis had an affair with Hopkins' husband, director Anatole Litvak. This fueled Hopkins' jealousy and added a sense of betrayal to the mix. As they fought for Litvak's affection, their rivalry turned into a bitter power struggle. On the set of The Old Maid, Hopkins and Davis's constant battle for supremacy became infamous. They would try to upstage each other by running to the director with complaints and suggestions. Their feud wasn't just about professional competition, it also had personal undertones. But as they say, all publicity is good publicity. The media capitalized on the rivalry, and Warner Brothers even staged a photo shoot with Hopkins and Davis in boxing gloves for their movie The Old Maid in 1939. Hopkins and Davis's feud became entertainment for the public, and they played along by publicly throwing jabs at each other through interviews and gossip columns. Their tumultuous relationship came to a head on the set of Old Acquaintance in 1943. In one scene, Davis shook Hopkins with such force that Hopkins' head snapped back. In retaliation, Hopkins slapped Davis so hard that Davis stormed off set. The scene may have unintentionally been campy in the finished film, but it reflected the real-life tension between Hopkins and Davis. The rivalry between Davis and Hopkins may have been legendary, but it wasn't the only one that defined Davis's career. Her tumultuous relationship with Joan Crawford had a more complex and layered history. 4. Joan Crawford. At the height of their careers, both Crawford and Davis were powerhouse actresses known for their exceptional performances. But while Davis has always been a respected theater actress who made her way to Hollywood, Crawford's start in the industry was less glamorous. Crawford began her career as a dancer, working her way up from chorus girl to leading lady. She was known for her beauty and sensuality, which earned her a contract with MGM in 1925. By the time Davis arrived in Hollywood in 1930, Crawford was already an established star. But it wasn't just their careers that set them apart, it was also their personalities. Davis was known for being outspoken and opinionated, while Crawford was more reserved and calculated. These differences would contribute to their ongoing feud. The first public incident of tension between the pair came when Crawford upstaged Davis in a play, setting the stage for what would become a recurring theme. But it was in 1933 that their rivalry reached new heights. That year, Davis had reached a pivotal moment in her career. Her name would finally appear above the title in the comedy Ex-Lady. Warner Brothers had planned an elaborate publicity campaign to announce Davis's new phase of stardom. But it was overshadowed by Crawford's announcement that she was divorcing her first husband on the same day. The media and press were more interested in Crawford's personal life than Davis's career milestone, and Ex-Lady was dropped from theaters after a week due to poor ticket sales. This was the first of many times that Crawford would upstage Davis in the press, fueling their rivalry even further. But it wasn't just their professional competition that fueled their feud. There were also personal undertones. In 1935, Davis starred in the drama Dangerous and fell hard for her co-star Franchot Tone. But before anything could happen between them, Crawford swooped in and began a relationship with Tone. Davis was heartbroken, and their feud only intensified when Crawford married Tone shortly after. The two actresses may have been vying for the same roles on screen, but it seemed like they were also fighting for the same man behind the scenes. This defining incident would shape Davis's lifelong hatred of Crawford. As their careers continued to overlap, so did their competition. In 1936, both actresses were nominated for Best Actress at the Academy Awards. Davis for her role in Dangerous and Crawford for her performance in The Story of Louis Pasteur. But when Davis won the award, it was clear that Crawford was not happy with the outcome. On stage, Crawford refused to applaud and even turned her back to Davis while she accepted her reward. This hostile gesture was just the beginning of their public rivalry, and it would only escalate from there. Despite their personal animosity towards each other, Davis and Crawford were cast in several films together throughout the 1940s and 1950s, and with each film came new stories of behind-the-scenes drama and tension. Their feud even extended to the set of Mildred Pierce, a movie that Crawford had her heart set on but ended up going to Davis after she turned it down. Director Michael Curtis was reluctant to cast Crawford, but she won him over with a convincing screen test. The movie was a success, earning Crawford her first and only Oscar, an award that Davis had been nominated for 5 times but never won. 2 years later, Crawford would once again take a role that was originally intended for Davis in the crime drama Possessed. She received another Oscar nomination for her performance, fueling Davis's resentment towards her even more. But it wasn't just their rivalry that kept them in the headlines. There were also rumors of a sexual attraction between the two actresses. Crawford's alleged bisexuality and Davis's own curiosity about it added another layer of complexity to their complicated relationship. In fact, Crawford had reportedly said that she wouldn't mind giving Davis a poke if she was in the right mood, adding to the speculation that their feud was fueled by sexual tension and competition for the same men. But it was in 1952, with the release of The Star, that their feud reached its peak. Written by Crawford's friend Catherine Albert, the movie was a thinly veiled depiction of her rivalry with Davis. But despite the unfavorable portrayal, Davis agreed to play the lead role as a washed-up actress clinging desperately to her fading stardom. The Star was meant to be a form of retaliation against Crawford, but it ended up being a hit at the box office and a reminder of their ongoing competition. It also set the stage for their later collaboration in Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, a film that would become the defining moment of their feud. Directed by Robert Aldrich, Baby Jane was meant to be a comeback for both actresses struggling to find work in Hollywood. And while the movie was a success, it also became a public document of their real-life rivalry. As depicted in Feud, Davis reluctantly agreed to star in Baby Jane on two conditions: that she play the title role and that director Robert Aldrich assure her he was not sleeping with Crawford. But even with these conditions met, tensions on set were high. In one scene where Jane beats Crawford's character Blanche, Crawford requests a body double because she doesn't trust Davis not to hurt her for real. During the filming of another scene, Crawford got her revenge by deliberately making herself heavy and forcing Davis to drag her across the room multiple times, causing her back pain. Despite these conflicts behind the scenes, Baby Jane became a box office sensation and earned Davis an Academy Award nomination. But Crawford, who had hoped to be nominated alongside Davis, was snubbed by the Academy. This led to Crawford's infamous stunt at the 1963 Oscars, where she accepted an absent Anne Bancroft's award, causing Davis to react with shock and disappointment. It was a clear message that Crawford would do anything to upstage Davis, even if it meant stealing her moment of recognition. But their feud didn't end there. In 1964, when the two were set to reunite on screen in the spiritual sequel, Hush Hush Sweet Charlotte, Crawford dropped out of the film after a week of filming, claiming to be sick. In reality, she was still reeling from Baby Jane and didn't want to risk being overshadowed by Davis once again. After several actresses turned down the role, Olivia de Havilland was ultimately cast as Crawford's replacement in the film. This would be the last time Davis and Crawford were set to work together before Crawford's death in 1977. But even after her death, their feud was still making headlines. In interviews following Crawford's passing, Davis was often quoted as saying, "You should never say bad things about the dead. You should only say good. Joan Crawford is dead. Good." However, there is no reliable source for this quote, and it may just be another example of the media pitting these two women against each other. In reality, Davis had conflicting feelings towards Crawford. She may have publicly feuded with her and resented her success, but deep down she also respected her talent and even defended her against criticism from others. As Davis said herself in a 1978 interview, "I was not Miss Crawford's biggest fan, but I did and still do respect her talent." Despite their rivalry, they both shared a passion for acting and were two of the greatest actresses of Hollywood's golden age. Their feud may have made headlines and captured the public's attention, but in the end, it was just a small part of their legacy. What truly matters is their talent, their contribution to film, and the impact they had on each other's lives. And perhaps in some way, they were even more similar than they ever realized. Both dealing with ungrateful daughters, both navigating the difficult world of Hollywood, and both ultimately leaving behind a lasting legacy that will be remembered for generations to come. Their stories are real, raw, and relatable, just like the characters they played on screen. And that is what truly makes them legends. If you enjoyed this video, there's a good chance you'll enjoy our other videos on Hollywood's juiciest feuds and scandals. Click here to watch more, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for regular updates on all things celebrity. See you on the next one.